My name is Mike McKenzie. I was raised in Lodi, California. Uh, I always say it's the Zinfandel capital of the world because they're pretty proud of their wine production. Um, I had a near-death experience in 2004. I was at my son's wedding, and I started feeling sick after I played baseball in the park with my kids. This was on a Wednesday, and I thought I was coming down with the flu. And I didn't want to be a distraction, so I just kind of played it off like, yeah, no big deal. But it got worse and worse. That was a Wednesday night when I started feeling sick. Thursday, I started feeling even worse. Friday, we had the rehearsal dinner, and we had to get tuxes and all that, so we were pretty busy. But man, I was really starting to feel sick, and I just didn't really know what was going on. My son's in the medical field, the one that was getting married, and we sat down after the rehearsal dinner late one night or late Friday night, and he was asking me like, "What do you think it could be?" And he's trying to self-diagnose, for me. He says, "Well, maybe it's your appendix. I mean, it really sounds like your appendix." And I said, "No, I don't think so. I think I just got the flu." So, we went to bed. Next day was going to be the wedding. Um, I went to the quick stop middle of the night, which was uh, pretty harrowing experience, actually. I got some Tylenol and some of the pink stuff to try to settle my stomach down, and got back to the hotel room. Took those, of course, didn't work. So Saturday morning, everybody's waking up, and I hadn't slept at all. I mean, I was just dead tired, and plus I'm sick, and I was running a fever. I could tell because I was sweating. It just wasn't good. But we went to the wedding. We got all the way through the wedding. Everything was beautiful, and it was at a golf course in Ventura, California. It's just a perfect day, beautiful wedding. We go through the reception. We get all the way done with all the dinners and all that. All the way through the wedding, everything was beautiful, and it was my kids came up to me and they said, "Okay, we're going to go to his new bride's family has a house in Ventura that's beautiful 3-story condo, overlooks the ocean." They said, "We're going to take the presents over there and open them and kind of keep the party going." And I said, "Guys, I got to go to the hospital and get checked out because I was just so sick by then." My favorite pictures of the wedding are the ones that are in black and white because I was so pale. So I went to the hospital. They finally got me in. It was almost 1 in the morning, and the nurse is checking me out, and she kind of tapping my abdomen. I'm telling her how sick I am. They take a blood test and they send it off to the lab, and she's poking around, and she says, "Well, I think it's your appendix." And I said, "Well, that's what my son said, but I don't think so." And she asked me, she says, "Have you done any physical activities lately? Anything unusual?" And I said, "Well, I played baseball in the park with my kids on Wednesday. In fact, that was the night that I started kind of feeling sick." And she says, "Wednesday?" Her expression changed. She's thinking, if I ruptured my appendix Wednesday night, this is Saturday night, 3 days. She says, "Well," she says, "let me do a few more tests, but I think it's definitely your appendix. And by the sound of things, it's probably ruptured." So she takes out this mallet after she's done poking around. She takes out this mallet where they tap your knee to check your reflexes. And she taps the bottom of my foot and she says, "Does that hurt?" And I said, "No." I kind of laughed. I'm thinking it's not a problem with my knee or, with my feet. It's a problem in my abdomen. So she tapped the other side with that little mallet. And man, I had pain in my abdomen that made me scream. And she says, "Okay, that's your appendix. If it ruptured on Wednesday, we need to get in there quick." And she said, "I'm going to call a surgeon right now." She leaves the room. About a half an hour later, surgeon comes in. He's looking at my blood test that came back from the lab. He says, "Yeah, your white blood cell count is through the roof." He said, "Judging by what's going on with that and your temperature, I think we better get in there real quick and get you taken care of because your appendix is probably ruptured." He says, "If they haven't ruptured, you'll be here for a day or two. If they have, you'll be here for 3 or 4 days." So he leaves. Nurse come back in. They wheel me down to the hall, or down the hall, down to the surgical room. And they slide me. A couple of guys helped me get over onto the surgical table, and it was just freezing cold in there. But I had 104 fever, um, and I'm sweating. And they put me on the surgical table, and without putting a mask on or anything, I look to my right, and Jesus walks into the room. He's wearing a white robe, and he looks at me, and he holds out his hand, and he says, "I want to answer your prayer." And I can't tell you how confusing that was, because I looked back around at all the other people, and they were gone. There was nobody in there. It was just Jesus and I. And everything just kind of like the atmosphere changed. Everything changed about it. It was so weird. And I'm thinking, when he's holding out his hand, he said, "I want to answer your prayer." I'm like, I didn't pray to die. I mean, I was praying that everything would be fine, that my family would be okay. And it just didn't make sense. But I took his hand, and as soon as I did, we were standing on the look. I looked down, and there, my feet were bare. There was like bluish green, beautiful grass. There, I couldn't see anything in front of me, but I could see down to the grass, and my senses were heightened to the point where I could feel and count every single blade of grass that touched my feet. I knew exactly how many blades of grass there were. It was weird, but everything else was super white. So I looked up, and I'm trying to adjust my eyes to the white, and all of a sudden, it's like that white. I describe it as fog, but it was almost like a curtain, like a veil, because it was just so bright. But I look to my right, and just then the curtain gets pulled. It's like somebody's pulling a curtain opening the windows, and this white pulled away from my right to my left. And now I'm looking at I am standing on a mountain. I look down below me, and not only can I see the grass, but in front of the grass, there's these beautiful, like pastel colored flowers, just beautiful flowers. And they're kind of bending and waving in the wind, but there's no wind. Um, Below that, it looks like now the white that was in front of me, that fog or that veil, has now settled over this valley. And there's a big giant city in this valley, but all I can see is rooftops. I can't see anything else. I can't see people or cars or nothing. All I see is rooftops. And the thing that I noticed first was there was a giant gold dome. It looked like a Capitol dome, pretty much in the center of the city, and it was huge. And there were some other golden rooftops that were sticking through, but there were a lot of them that were white, and a lot of them looked like church steeples that were poking through that fog. Um, but one of the things that I noticed, like church steeples here, have crosses on the top, a lot of them, but there were no crosses on these. And I thought that was kind of interesting and something I would look into later. Um, and then on the other side of that, there was another mountain that stretched off in the distance on the other side of the city, and it was pretty tall. And this one had these beautiful pine trees. They looked like they had like these lacy, like pine needles on them. Hard to describe. Beautiful green, beautiful dark green, and they were just perfect shape. And then above that was the sky that looked like a sunset, like the most beautiful sunset, most vivid colors I've ever seen. They started out like reds and oranges and yellows, and then it kind of faded into these, purples, and there was blue at the very top. And there were kind of like these white, like wispy clouds, like we call them cirrus clouds, but they were just different looking clouds. And but like I said, there was no sun, so that was strange. And then I look over to my right, and there's white, like even whiter than the white curtain that was in front of me. There's a basketball sized light that's glowing, like brighter than the other white that was there. And it's kind of shimmering. It's just this beautiful white color. And all of a sudden, it starts sending out these light beams, which was pretty weird looking, but they look like fluorescent tubes, fluorescent light tubes. Um, but they were only about 2 feet long. They were a little bit fatter than the fluorescent tubes, and they started like slowly kind of going by me. They're going all over the place, and one of them came like aiming right at my head, and I thought, what do I do now? And while I'm thinking about it, it just hits me right in the forehead, and it goes right through me. As it goes through me, it makes this kind of a light buzzing sound, and it warmed me like right down to my toes. Everything just felt warm and warm and fuzzy, lack of a better term. And but now these light beams are going across over the city, and one of them hits like the tip of one of those trees. And it was like the tip of the tree had a diamond on it, because when that light beam hit that diamond, it burst into like hundreds of tiny little light beams. And it was like fireworks. And so pretty soon another one goes across and it hits another tip. And all of a sudden there's just fireworks everywhere. Like these things are just popping like pow, 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 pow all over. And they keep flying, and there's light beams going everywhere, tiny light beams going everywhere. And I looked back at the light source where these things were coming from, and Jesus is still there. And he says to me, "It's the glory of the Lord." And when he said that, I was so weak in my knees that I fell. And when my knees hit the ground, at the instant that they hit the ground, they shocked me and they brought me back. And so now the scene's gone. I open my eyes and I look at this. I've got a surgeon or a doctor standing over me with a mask. And he says to me, "Do you know your name?" And again, I'm really confused now, because I'm thinking, where's Jesus? Where is the beautiful scenery? Where did it all go? What's going on here? I just couldn't put two and two together. And he says again, "Do you know your name?" And I answered him, but I answered in my mind. I didn't verbalize. And so he asked me one more time, "Do you know your name?" And I thought, oh, okay, I need to open my mouth and tell him my name. And my mouth was so dry, and I was still burning up again. And I said, "Yeah, Mike." And he says, "Do you know where you are?" And again, I had to think, okay, I was at the wedding. The wedding was in Ventura. So I said, "Ventura." And he turns around to somebody else in the room, and I looked, and I noticed there was like 5 or 6 more people, all wearing scrubs. And he says, "Okay, he's back. Let's get him up to ICU." So they wheeled me up to ICU. I spent 4 days in ICU. I had some complications. I developed pneumonia. I developed what they call an abscess, where the doctor gets out all the germs that he can. He told me later that what happens is those germs gather back together, and I had a golf ball sized abscess in my abdomen. And he said the germs basically try and finish you off. So I spent a total of 12 days in the hospital. And there's a lot of stories that I could tell. That I'm writing another book, so I'll tell the rest of the stories. But so when Jesus appeared to me, he said, "I want to answer your prayer." And I thought about that, and it took a couple days to remember this. But when I was a little kid, my grandfather passed away, and I remember sitting in a church, and the priest is saying, Jesus is, your Grandpa Ben is Grandpa Pete's in a better place now. Ben is my son. Pete's in a better place now. He's in heaven. There's no more pain. There's no sorrow. There's no tears. And I remember thinking as a kid, heaven seems like a pretty cool place. And I remember asking God, "Can you show me heaven?" And that became this kind of a nightly routine with me and God. I would say my prayers every night before I went to bed. It was just a little rote prayer that everybody says. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. And I always added, and can you show me heaven? And so he did. It took him about 40 years to answer that prayer. And then the glory of the Lord, when I was also a little kid, a little older, probably about 10 years old, we used to watch all the Christmas shows together as a family. And I remember laying on the floor watching the Christmas show, a Christmas, I think it's called Charlie Brown's Christmas. And there was this part where Linus came out onto the stage and he's carrying his little blanket and he walks out and he quotes the Bible from Luke where he says, the glory of the Lord shone all around them. And man, I remember as a kid thinking, that sounds so cool. If this is God that made heaven and earth and everything that I know and interact with, made all this stuff, what must his glory look like? That's got to be pretty spectacular. And so I started asking God, can you show me your glory too? Show me heaven and show me your glory. And he did both of those things in that one trip. He took advantage of my illness. And I remember him telling me the next day, I heard God tell me, I had to get you flat on your back, away from all the distractions so that you would listen to me. And he had other things to say to me. There's a lot that, like I said, that I'm putting it in the next book because it's too much to put in one little podcast. It was a 3-hour conversation. But a lot of the things that he told me eventually came true. And it is pretty interesting. This happened 20 years ago. And my first book came out 12 years ago. I sold it all over the world, did real well, but it wasn't about that. I've never done this for money. It's my testimony about what Jesus can do in your life. And my life changed quite a bit after that. That was the day that incident was when I started a relationship with Jesus. And I just pray for all unbelievers that they get to know Jesus the way I know him, because, we live in a fallen world and there's so much beauty still in God's creation. I was never one to stop and look at sunsets or, look at flowers. I just kind of took it all for granted. And I remember when the nurse made me walk for the first time, it was after surgery, a couple days later. I picked up my IV pole. I had 4 tubes coming out of me from all over the place. And I would walk down the halls. And I remember looking at pictures in the hospital. And it was a beach town. Ventura's right on the coast. And there were all these pictures of beaches and sunsets and beautiful landscapes. And I just remember just crying, looking at those things, thinking, man, what have I been missing? I take it all for granted. I had a real stressful job. So that was one of the things that Jesus told me that day was, you got to slow down. You got to appreciate the beauty. I do now. I really do. There was one other incident that I'll tell you about. I was on a like a liquid diet for about the first 7 days because of the abscess and because of all the problems I was having. So the first day that they let me eat semi-solid food, they gave me a banana and some pudding and, stuff like that. And I just remember peeling that banana and I thought, what a miracle. God's creation is such a miracle. I'm eating something that grew out of the ground 2,000 feet, 2,000 miles away from me. And it's making me healthy and it's bringing me back, to a healthy life. And it was like that creation just hit me like a ton of bricks. It was really amazing. The last thing, when I was in heaven, when Jesus showed me heaven, there were no crosses. And I thought that was strange. And I think that in heaven, there's no reason to celebrate the cross, because the last thing Jesus said when he died was, it is finished. and we don't need to celebrate that cross anymore. You know, on earth, we look at the cross as a symbol of what Jesus did for us, but in heaven, there's no reason to celebrate the cross anymore because it's done. The last thing I'll leave you with is the surgeon came to see me the next day, and I wasn't going to tell him about what happened. I mean, he came in and he said, "I hear we had an incident last night," and I was so weak I couldn't pick my hands up off my chest. But he said, "Yours is the worst case I've ever seen." And this is a man, he's about 70 years old when he did surgery on me. And I said, "Man, you're kidding." And he says, "Yeah, it was pretty bad." And he's poking around, you're checking the stitches and stuff. And he started to leave, and then he came back and he goes, "I told you it's the worst case I've ever seen, but that's not exactly true. But yours is the worst case I've ever seen where the patient lived." And he actually said to me, "God's not done with you yet." So he certainly isn't. I mean, only God could take a story that's 20 years old and revive it 12 years later. Guidepost contacted me about my NDE, and they put my story in their Glimpses of Heaven book. And it's just taken off. I think right now I'm over 3 million views on YouTube of people that have heard my testimony. And I'm sure Kim can attest to this, that the comments aren't always kind. So I know I'm reaching people that need to hear the good news of Jesus. So, the other thing I like to tell people is whatever you're going through, he's going to hold your hand. He's going to get you through it. He did me. And, the surgeon was right. God's not done with me yet. God bless you.